I should have known something was off when I saw the look in Darren's eyes that morning. The way he walked into my office, strutting like he was the king of the world, reminded me of a bull in a china shop. He thought he was invincible. I knew better. But I didn't have time to stop him. You see, I'd spent the last 15 years doing the same thing, over and over again, putting out fires before they started. It's a skill that doesn't get the attention it deserves, especially in a place like this. The big wins, the flashy deals, they all get the spotlight. But me? I was the one making sure the company didn't get buried in legal lawsuits, regulatory nightmares, and penalties that could send us under. My job was simple. Make sure that nothing, and I mean nothing, came close to damaging the reputation and future of this place. I'm Jack Taylor, 43 years old, and until 3 days ago, I was the senior legal counsel at Archon Industries, a position I'd earned the hard way. They trusted me. The board trusted me. Hell, the CEO himself trusted me. For years, I was the guy who made sure things ran smoothly behind the scenes. No one knew my name in the press, but they sure as hell knew my work. I had managed to dodge 12 major lawsuits over the years, each one threatening to cripple us, each one my responsibility to prevent. I had built a reputation for myself as someone who got the job done with surgical precision. But I never expected that reputation would be a double-edged sword. It was a Wednesday when everything changed. The sun had started to dip behind the skyline, casting long shadows across my office, and I was deep in the details of a final draft for a major contract. A contract that, if signed, would shield the company from a potential multi-million-dollar lawsuit. Another win. Another day at the office for me. But the second the door to my office swung open, I knew things were about to take a turn. Darren. There was something in his gait, the way he walked in with that cocky smirk plastered across his face. He was the CEO's son, but it wasn't just nepotism that had gotten him where he was. It was ambition. Dangerous ambition. And he wasn't the type to just follow the rules. He wanted to change everything, even if he didn't fully understand what he was dealing with. "Jack, we need to talk," Darren said, standing there in his custom-made suit like he was some kind of corporate god. His tone was familiar, the one that always made me grind my teeth. I had seen it before in younger executives, guys with more drive than sense, looking to change everything just to make their mark. They all burned out. But Darren had more power than the others. His last name gave him clout, and today it was clear that he was going to use it against me. I leaned back in my chair, setting the contract aside. I wasn't worried. Darren was out of his league. He didn't understand the intricacies of corporate law, but he thought he did. I knew where this conversation was going, and I wasn't prepared to give him the satisfaction of seeing me sweat. "What's on your mind, Darren?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. He started pacing around my office, clearly trying to make himself at home in a space that had never been his. "I've been reviewing the company's legal strategy. You know, the stuff you've been doing for the past 15 years, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "And I think it's time for a change. We need to be more aggressive, more modern. Your cautious approach, it's holding us back." I could feel the tension building in my chest. He didn't get it. He didn't understand the stakes. I had spent the better part of my career carefully navigating the legal minefield that surrounded a company of Archon's size. Every decision had weight. Every step was a calculated risk. But Darren? He wanted shortcuts. "Darren," I said, my voice calm but firm, "what you're suggesting could lead us into serious legal trouble. We've avoided countless lawsuits because of the careful, cautious approach we've taken. You can't just throw that out because it doesn't fit your vision." He stopped pacing, his eyes narrowing. "You're being too cautious, Jack. This is the real world. Legal is just paperwork. We need to move fast, take risks. We can't afford to sit on the sidelines. His words hit me like a slap to the face. He didn't understand. Legal wasn't just paperwork. It was the foundation of everything we'd built. Without it, the company would crumble. And here he was, throwing it all away in the name of speed and modernity. He was playing with fire, and I was the one who would have to clean up the mess when it inevitably burned us all. But then, as if to seal his ignorance, he said the words I'd never expected to hear. "You're fired." I didn't blink. I didn't protest. I didn't beg. I just sat there, the silence between us growing heavier by the second. It took all of 5 seconds for him to repeat himself, as if he wasn't sure I had heard him the first time. "You're fired, Jack. We're moving in a different direction." I let out a slow breath, standing up from my chair. The room suddenly felt smaller, the air thicker. I grabbed my briefcase and began packing my things. No anger, no retaliation, no emotional outburst, just a quiet, deliberate action. As I packed, Darren stood there watching me, not sure what to do with himself. He thought he had won, but as I slid the last file into my bag, I turned to him with a smile. "Darren," I said, my voice soft, "you've made the biggest mistake of your life, and you won't even know it until it's too late." I didn't wait for him to respond. I just turned, walked out of the office, and left the building. The doors closed behind me, and with them, the last chapter of my career at Archon. I didn't look back, but I knew. He'd soon learn exactly what I had protected them from all these years, and when that day came, I wouldn't be there to fix it for him. 3 days. That's all it took before the consequences of Darren's decision started to rear their ugly head. I wasn't exactly watching from the sidelines, but I wasn't in any rush to jump back in either. I kept my distance, spending my days focusing on personal matters. I wasn't worried about my career. I had spent 15 years with Archon Industries building something solid, something that could withstand a few bumps. My reputation had preceded me. My next opportunity was already out there, just waiting for the right moment to find me. But Darren? He had no idea what he'd just unleashed. I had heard that he hired Ben, his college buddy, to replace me. Ben had zero legal background, no real understanding of corporate law, and worst of all, he had no clue how to steer a company clear of the constant legal minefield that we operated in. He was exactly the kind of guy who'd laugh off the importance of legal protection, thinking it was just a bunch of paperwork to be dealt with after the fact. I'd spent years dodging landmines, and now Darren had handed over the keys to the guy who thought they were just painted lines on a road. I wasn't surprised, though. Darren needed someone who could tell him what he wanted to hear, not someone who would stand in his way. I didn't fit that mold. I never had. By the time I had finished up some personal business and cleared my head, I knew I wasn't going back to Archon. I had made my peace with that. But what happened next? That I didn't expect. It started with a memo that crossed my desk at home. The subject line alone, urgent, legal oversight in client contract, was enough to make my stomach sink. The email was from Lisa, an attorney at a firm we'd worked with for years, one I trusted like family. I opened it quickly, my mind already racing. The company had missed something, a huge, glaring detail in a contract I'd been finalizing before I left. Without a few crucial clauses, we were exposed to a class action lawsuit that could run into the millions. I ran my fingers through my hair, already feeling the headache creeping up behind my eyes. This wasn't a small mistake. This wasn't just a technicality or a missing date. This was a potential disaster, one that could undo everything I had spent years protecting. It wasn't just the lawsuit itself that bothered me. It was that the company, the people who had trusted me for years, were now in a mess of their own making. Darren had walked in with his big ideas, swept me aside, and now he was about to feel the weight of what it meant to be reckless. To think that legal was just paperwork. I tried to shake it off, but the calls started coming in, one after another. I knew this would escalate quickly, so I grabbed my phone and dialed Ben's number. The phone rang 3 times before he picked up. "Hey Jack, what's up?" Ben's voice was cheery, almost too cheery, like he had no clue what was coming. I could already feel the frustration bubbling in my chest. "Ben, you need to listen to me very carefully," I said, trying to keep my tone steady. "There's a major issue with one of the contracts we were working on. A big one. The kind that could put the company in serious legal jeopardy. You need to fix it, and you need to fix it now." He didn't sound alarmed at all. "What's the problem? I'm sure it's just a minor thing, Jack. We'll get it sorted." I could hear the dismissive tone in his voice, like I was just another guy calling him with some routine update. "No, Ben," I snapped. "It's not minor. It's huge. If this gets out, we're looking at a class action lawsuit that could ruin us. You can't just fix this with a press release or some cheap settlement. You need to act, and you need to act fast." There was a long pause on the other end. Then Ben chuckled. "I got this, Jack. Don't worry. I'll handle it. It's all part of the job, right?" he said, brushing me off as if I were overreacting. "We're good." I felt my stomach tighten as I fought to keep my cool. He had no idea what he was up against. Ben thought this was some easy fix, something you could smooth over with a few phone calls and a couple of meetings. But this wasn't just another corporate hiccup. This was a ticking time bomb, and he was holding the detonator. "Ben, you don't get it," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "You're not ready for this. You can't just throw a Band-Aid on a bullet wound and hope it heals. You have to get ahead of this before it explodes." He sighed, clearly tired of the conversation. "Look, Jack, I'll handle it. I appreciate the advice, but I've got this under control." My blood pressure spiked, and I could feel the anger rising in me. I had worked so hard to protect that company, to keep it safe, and now it was in the hands of a man who didn't even understand the weight of the responsibility. Ben had no idea how deep the hole was about to get. I didn't say anything else. I just hung up. I paced around my living room for a few minutes, my mind racing. There was a part of me that wanted to jump in, to rush back and save them from the mess they were about to create. But I knew that wasn't my job anymore. Darren had made his choice, and now he had to live with the consequences. It didn't take long for the calls to start flooding in, one after another. The company was unraveling, and Darren was scrambling to save face. I knew it was too late. The damage had been done. Ben was about to find out what I already knew. You don't mess with legal when you don't know what you're doing. And when you do, the storm you've unleashed is coming for you, whether you're ready or not. 2 days later, the storm I had warned them about hit with full force. The lawsuit wasn't just a routine complaint or some minor legal grievance. It was a class action. A full-blown, multi-million-dollar assault that threatened not only to bankrupt the company, but also expose us to regulatory scrutiny that could drag on for years. It was exactly what I'd predicted. The kinds of legal loopholes they'd left wide open, the issues they'd glossed over in the name of speed and efficiency, had all caught up with them. I wasn't surprised by the timing. These things never happened overnight. The plaintiffs had been gathering evidence for weeks, probably months. When they filed, it was like the floodgates opened. The media picked it up quickly. The legal team, what was left of it, was in full panic mode. Phones were ringing off the hook, emails were piling up, each more urgent than the last. The kind of chaos you can feel in the pit of your stomach. My old colleagues were scrambling, trying to pick up the pieces of a puzzle that had already been shattered. It didn't take long before I started getting calls. Calls from people who had once been on my side. People I had worked with for years, all desperately trying to patch the cracks that were now spreading like wildfire. They weren't calling me because they were grateful. No, they were calling because they were scared. They needed help, and they knew I was the one who had seen this coming. But I wasn't interested in saving them. And then came the call from Darren. I could almost hear his panic seeping through the line. It was a sound I had never expected to hear. Not from him. It was the sound of a man who had realized just how far over his head he was. The voice I once heard filled with arrogance now wavered. "We need you back," Darren said, his words clipped and hurried, like he had no idea how to form a coherent sentence. "You were right. We were wrong. Please, we need your help." For a moment I just stared at my phone, the weight of his desperation hanging in the air. I'd been waiting for this call. I knew it was coming, but even so, hearing it was something else. There was a small, twisted part of me that almost felt sorry for him. Almost. I leaned back in my chair, feeling a brief flicker of satisfaction. This was what he deserved. This was the result of his reckless decisions, and now he was facing the fallout. My reputation had been built on precisely this kind of thing, the ability to foresee the disaster before it struck and act accordingly. Darren didn't understand that. He had thought he was invincible, that his quick fixes could replace years of experience. Now, here he was, begging for the very thing he had thrown away so casually. I took a deep breath and then answered him with the coldest tone I could muster. "Darren," I said, "you were the one who said we were going in a new direction. That was your choice. You fired me. Now you need to live with the consequences." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. For a second, I thought he might say something, but I already knew it wasn't going to help. There was no going back for him. He had crossed the line, and now he was paying for it. He didn't get it. He hadn't understood what it meant to be responsible for a company's survival. I'd tried to warn him, but now I was done. "I'm sorry, Jack," he said, his voice weak. "Please, we need you. Just this once. Please." I could almost picture him standing there, probably sweating, trying to come up with the right words to convince me. But it was too late. I had already made my decision. I had given everything to that company, and he had tossed it all away for some half-baked idea of what leadership should look like. He didn't deserve my help, and I wasn't going to throw myself back into the fire for him. "I'm not coming back, Darren," I said firmly. "You'll figure it out, or you won't. But I'm done." The line went silent again, this time for longer. I could hear his breathing, ragged and panicked, before he finally muttered a quiet goodbye and hung up. It was over. There was no going back from that. The company's reputation was in freefall, and I wasn't about to play savior for a man who had never appreciated what I had done. My time at Archon was over, and I was okay with that. In the days that followed, the media spun the story into something more sensational than it already was. The lawsuit was just the tip of the iceberg, and every new detail uncovered by the press made it worse. Darren and Ben's desperation was becoming more apparent by the hour. Their carefully curated image was starting to unravel, and it was clear there was nothing they could do to stop it. The company I had once worked for was falling apart, piece by piece, and they couldn't even see it. I didn't care about them. I didn't care about the company anymore. What I cared about was my reputation. I had built it on trust, precision, and foresight. They had squandered it. And now, watching everything they had worked for crumble, I felt a strange kind of satisfaction. A satisfaction born not of vengeance, but of vindication. The moment had come. The very thing I had worked so hard to prevent was now unfolding right in front of me. The storm had arrived, and Darren's world was being torn apart. The pieces of his ego, his ambition, and his arrogance were scattered in the wake of his decisions, and he didn't even know how to pick them up. I didn't need to be there to watch it happen. I had already moved on. As the days dragged on, it became clear. The storm wasn't just passing through, it was devastating everything in its path. The lawsuit, once a mere whisper in the legal halls, had become a full-blown crisis. Media outlets were already all over it, dissecting the company's failures, pointing fingers, and publishing articles that painted Archon Industries as a sinking ship. I couldn't help but watch from the sidelines as the mess I'd warned about took shape, piece by piece, with Darren and Ben scrambling to patch things up in every direction. Their panic was palpable, desperate moves made in every corner of the office, but none of it mattered. It was too late. The cracks were already wide open. But here's the thing. I didn't care. I couldn't bring myself to feel any sympathy for them. Not anymore. Not after everything. The truth was, Darren and Ben had sealed their fate the moment they made the decision to get rid of me. They thought they could replace experience with arrogance, that they could throw caution to the wind and rewrite the rules. Now the consequences were rolling in like a tidal wave, and I was watching from the shore, perfectly content to let them drown. What concerned me, though, was something else entirely. I wasn't worried about the company's survival, or Darren's career, or Ben's for that matter. What I cared about was the one thing I had always protected, the only thing that had mattered throughout my entire career: my reputation. I had spent 15 years at Archon, always in the background, quietly maneuvering to prevent legal disaster after legal disaster. 12 major lawsuits averted, dozens of high-stakes deals gone smoothly. I had done my job, and I had done it well. But now, watching the company falter, I couldn't help but feel a sense of quiet satisfaction. I had warned them. I had laid it all out for them, and they had dismissed me without a second thought. But the world had already moved on. Now, I was free. The phone rang again, another desperate call, probably from someone on the inside who was trying to fix things. But I ignored it. I didn't need to answer. I didn't need to be there anymore. The company was falling apart, and the new legal hires were floundering, their panic driving them to make mistakes faster than they could clean them up. There was no savior coming for them. Not me. Not anyone. They had made their bed. And that's when it hit me. I didn't need them. I didn't need Darren, didn't need Archon, didn't need any of it. The fire that had burned in me when I was first let go had cooled, replaced by something far more satisfying: vindication. I'd spent years protecting a company that didn't value me. I had been the shield, the one who stepped in before things went wrong, but I was never the one who got credit. Now, they were in a mess of their own making, and for once, it wasn't my problem. I had walked away, and the world had kept turning. I realized that it didn't matter if Archon survived this, or if it crumbled under its own weight. Either way, I had made my peace with it. The constant pressure, the stress, the never-ending battles to keep the company's legal standing intact. It was no longer my burden. Darren and Ben could carry it now. I knew deep down, this wasn't over. Darren's father, the CEO, might have been a figurehead, but even he couldn't ignore the damage Darren had caused. The old man might not have been involved in the day-to-day operations, but the board, the investors, everyone who held a stake in this company would come down hard. They would push for action. The CEO would have to choose, either clean house and bring in someone who could fix the disaster his son had created, or stand by and let the company fall apart. I didn't think Darren would get to make that decision himself. His ego was too large, and he was too proud to admit his failure, even if it meant destroying everything he'd inherited. His father would step in eventually, and he would either fire Darren or force him into some corner office position where he could do no more damage. It was a matter of time. But none of it mattered to me. I was no longer part of the machine. The company, which had been my entire world for so long, was no longer my responsibility. They were no longer my problem. I could almost feel the weight lift off my shoulders, the suffocating pressure that had followed me for years finally evaporating. I had protected them. I had been their unseen guardian, the one who made sure everything ran smoothly. But now, I was free. The world outside of Archon was waiting for me, and it was time to step into it. I wasn't tied to the past anymore. I was done with the company, done with the games, done with the stress. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe again. And when the day came that Darren's father walked in to deal with the wreckage, I wouldn't be there to fix it. They wouldn't have me to turn to. They had pushed me away, and now they were going to pay for it. The world moved on without them, and it moved on without me too. But that was fine. It was a new chapter, one where I didn't have to clean up anyone else's mess. The phone rang the next day, cutting through the quiet like a sharp reminder. I glanced at the caller ID, the name flashing across the screen, CEO. The CEO himself. I couldn't say I was surprised. I knew it was only a matter of time before Darren's father realized the damage his son had done. It wasn't just the lawsuit anymore. It was the way Darren had mishandled everything. His own reputation, the company's future, and the trust people had put in him. When you inherit something that's already been built, it's easy to think you can take shortcuts. But Darren had underestimated just how fragile everything was. I let the phone ring a few more times before picking it up. No need to rush. "Jack," the voice on the other end said, calm but heavy, with unspoken frustration. "I need to see you. We need to talk." There was no formal greeting, no attempt at small talk. He didn't even ask how I was doing. It was just business as usual, but this time there was a noticeable shift in his tone. This wasn't about strategy or the next big move. This was desperation. This was the CEO, a man who had been coasting on the reputation of his name, finally realizing that his son's mistakes were about to unravel everything he'd spent decades building. I knew exactly what this was. This wasn't a meeting to discuss the future of the company. This was a last-ditch effort to save face, to see if I could come back in and fix the mess before it completely destroyed everything. I didn't hesitate. "I'm not coming back," I said, cutting straight to the point. "You fired me. I won't make the same mistake twice." There was a pause on the other end of the line, a long one. And in that silence, I could almost feel the weight of his realization settling in. The realization that Darren's reckless decisions had put him in a corner, and there was no easy way out. That his son, in his arrogance, had cost him everything. I wasn't sure if the CEO was embarrassed, angry, or just resigned to the inevitable. But I could feel the shift. The power dynamic had changed. I sat back in my chair looking out the window. The sun was starting to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the city, and I couldn't help but smile. I had already won. I wasn't looking for revenge. I wasn't looking to rub their noses in the mess they'd made. But as I heard the CEO's voice crackle on the other end, trying to salvage whatever he could, I knew that there was no greater satisfaction than this moment. Watching the house of cards Darren had built crumble before his very eyes. "Jack, please," he pleaded, his voice a little quieter now. "I don't know what else to do. The damage it's beyond anything we could have anticipated. I need you. The board needs you." The board. The ones who had trusted me for years. The ones who had put their faith in Darren and now saw the empire they'd invested in slowly coming apart at the seams. They weren't calling because they believed in Darren's vision anymore. They weren't calling because they thought he could turn things around. They were calling because they needed someone with experience, someone who could clean up the mess. And I was the only one who could do it. But I wasn't going to be their scapegoat. "You don't need me," I said, my voice even, controlled. "What you need is to face the consequences of your decisions. Darren was your choice, and you let him make a fool of himself, and of you." There was another pause. I imagined the CEO sitting in his office, the weight of my words sinking in. I could almost see him, slumped in his chair, trying to process what had happened, trying to figure out where it all went wrong. "I'm sorry, Jack," he finally said, the words coming out almost like an apology, though it wasn't enough. Not for me, not for the company. I didn't care. "You should have thought about that before you decided to throw me out," I said, my words sharp, precise. "You wanted a new direction, remember? Well, this is the price of your choices." For a moment, the silence stretched on, and in that silence, I realized something else. I wasn't angry anymore. The bitterness that had fueled my frustration when I was first fired was gone. There was nothing left but clarity. I didn't need to be angry. They had already given me everything I needed. I had done my part. I had protected the company from the shadows, but I had never been truly seen, not for the full value of what I had contributed. And now, I didn't need their recognition. The world was moving on, and I was moving with it. "You should go," I said, finally ending the conversation. "There's nothing more I can do for you." I hung up the phone, set it down on the table, and leaned back in my chair. There was no satisfaction in the moment, no gloating, just a quiet understanding that this was the way things were meant to go. Darren's fall was inevitable. He had never truly understood the gravity of the decisions he was making. He had never understood the weight of his responsibility. As I sat there, I thought about all the years I'd spent, always in the background, always the one doing the hard work, while others took the credit. For the first time in a long time, I realized I didn't need anyone to see me. I didn't need anyone's approval. The house of cards had fallen, and I was the one who had watched it happen, calmly, from the sidelines. There was no greater satisfaction than that.